Good morning.
Hi, Sally.
Good morning.
Can you see us? You can, right?
I can, yeah.
We'll be starting in a few minutes. We just wanted to be sure you were in with us.
Okay.
Okay?
And then, you need to enable me to share my screen.
I'm sorry, say that again, please.
You need to make me a co-host so I can share my screen.
Okay. Are you doing that? We're doing that now.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, you're fine. Go ahead.
There you go, Sally. You should be able to share your screen now, okay?
Okay, good. Should we test it?
Go ahead. Sounds good to me.
Okay.
There you go.
Let's see.
You are in. Looks like you're able to do the sharing, okay?
Okay.
All right. Sounds good.
I'll stop sharing for now.
Yeah. That's what I've been trying to do. Yeah. 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 And there's like 40. So every time there's yeah, it's I'm sure that. I mean, they're using my own. Yeah, the worst thing. Yes. I think it was all. Yeah. And then the students seem so overcrowded. Even stacked in for days there. You know, when you eat like. A little bit. I'm trying to.
It always fills it out.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're about ready to start. I'm Sarah McDonald, the president of the League of Women Voters of Lee County. Our speaker, Sally. Sally, are you there? There she comes.
I'm here.
Speaker is Sally Butzin. She has a PhD in elementary education from Florida State University. She taught school in St. Louis, where my children went to school. In 2008, she was named a distinguished educator by Florida State University. She's the immediate past president of the league in Tallahassee. She's on the state education task force. And because she lives in Tallahassee, she's on the lobby corps for the state league. Sally, would you like to begin?
Yes, thank you so much for the invitation, and thanks to all of you for getting out on a Saturday morning. Let me first start by saying how sorry I am for what your community has gone through with Hurricane Ian. I hope things are on the mend, but I know it was a horrible disaster for you guys. And we're about to have a horrible hurricane up here in Tallahassee as the legislature session starts on Monday. And of course, public education, as we know, is under attack. And so I'm going to talk to you about how did we get here, where we are now. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen, and we'll start looking at some slides here. Okay, let me see. Okay, hold on here. We're going to do the slideshow. All right, here we go. All right, what I'm going to talk about is what I'm calling the dismantling of public education, and how did we get here? So we're going to go back to where we started, the birth of public education. Some of you that may have studied education may know who this person is. He's considered the father of public education, and it's Horace Mann. The dawn of the industrial age was when people realized that the education system that our country had at the time was not going to be adequate for this new dawn of the industrial age. Prior to this, you know, there was religious schools and some private schools for the wealthy, a lot of homeschoolings, one-room schoolhouses, just a little bit of everything. But Horace Mann and others proposed that we needed to have something stronger. So this is what they proposed, and what was finally adopted was that we should have a universal public education system that was non-sectarian, had well-trained professional teachers, the curriculum based on the tenets of a free society, paid for, controlled, and sustained by an interested public. So we agreed as a country that we would use our tax money to fund this universal public education system. So over the years, this worked pretty well. And then 1957 was the year the Russians put up Sputnik and beat us at space. And so there was great consternation that, oh no, our students are not keeping up and that we're falling behind. So there was a great push to move science education in particular to make it stronger. And that went along for a while. And then in 1983, a report was released called A Nation at Risk. And this really woke people up to the fact that our students were falling behind and our public schools were not up to speed as they needed to be. And this again sparked, what are we going to do? And so there was a lot of things tried to make things better. And then I have to say that this, I think, was a very profound impact on public education and the quality of public education. Because prior to this, many of us remember of a certain age that women didn't have a whole lot of choices for careers. You could be a nurse, a secretary, or a teacher. And so we had a great pool of well-educated, intelligent women who became teachers. But as the feminism movement grew and women became much more able to do about anything they wanted to, the talent pool for teachers was really squeezed. And women weren't willing to continue working for low wages and no respect. And so they chose other careers. And I personally saw this happen where when I was in college, I graduated in 1967. I would say about half of the girls in my sorority house were education majors. And a few years ago, I was invited to come to the sorority house at Florida State for a luncheon. And I asked the girls that I was at the table with, how many of you are education majors? None. And of all the women in my sorority house, they could only think of one girl that was an education major. So this, I think, also had a profound effect on what started happening with education in our country. Then in 2002, the response to raise standards came from No Child Left Behind. Now, this was a bipartisan bill. It was signed by George W. Bush, and it really had a big impact. And it was bipartisan. In fact, Ted Kennedy was one of the co-sponsors of this bill. And the idea was to stop what they called the soft bigotry of low expectations. And I saw this in my own career too, that there were a lot of kids that are falling behind, especially those students in inner city, high poverty schools. Students of color really were being left behind because there wasn't a whole lot of expected of them. So the idea was, let's bring in standards and accountability. Let's raise standards, and there would be sanctions for non-compliance, which means that schools, if they didn't bring up their test scores, they would be closed down or they had to be fixed. So this was really the start of where we are heading now. And Florida, Governor George Bush's brother, Jeb, of course, became our governor. And he, prior to that, was really into education. And he had a foundation, which still exists, called the Foundation for Florida's Future. It's also known as Excellence in Education. And this foundation, based here in Tallahassee, is really the architect of what's happening with this privatization of public education. So this is where another big profound change in public education for Florida was in 1998. when voters approved these constitution revisions, which really, really changed the landscape of public education. First of all, the Commissioner of Education would no longer be an elected position. And the Commissioner of Education was removed from the cabinet. And the governor appoints the Commissioner of Education, and the governor appoints the State Board of Education. So you can see, starting with Jeb Bush, he really pushed for these reforms. Whoops, sorry. Let me go back here. He pushed for these reforms, and this gave the governor complete and utter control of public education in Florida. So there was the beginning of where we are headed now. Now, Jeb Bush in 1999 is when he put out what he called his 8+ plan for education. And this is where sanctions really, really started to become high stakes. This was when we started, actually the FCAT, the Florida Comprehensive Assessment Test, was actually prior to Bush. When Betty Castor was Commissioner of Education, the FCAT began. So there was testing, but what Bush did was bring it to a much more high stress level, let's put it that way. This was when he started this idea of grading schools, A, B, C, D, F. And so if the school didn't get a good grade, there would be sanctions. They would lose money. They would be potentially even closed down. This is also when third graders had to be retained, in other words, failed, if they didn't pass the reading test. And this was a tremendous stress on little children who knew that if they didn't do well on the state test, they could have to be held back in third grade. And for a child, this is just a traumatic, horrible experience. But the theory was that if you can't read well by the time you are going into fourth grade, it really does become a problem for being a successful student. But at the same time, this retention plan was a very draconian method of helping kids read better. Now, this is also when they started this whole idea of evaluating teachers, and they would get bonuses based on their kids' test scores. And this was also very stressful. In fact, there were cases where teachers, like if you were a PE teacher, you didn't even teach reading, math, or language arts, you would be denied bonuses if your school test scores weren't well received. So the teacher evaluations is really when we started to see teachers leaving and realizing, this is just not right. Then this is really the big move, is when school choice came in. So one of the ideas here is if your child is in a failing school or a school that's not doing well or not meeting their needs, you would have the option to move your child to another school within the district. Now, of course, that still depended on whether there was room at that school. And then this is when we really start to see the proliferation of charter schools. Charter schools are public schools. They're under the auspices of the local school board, or they started that way. But they're operated differently. And we'll talk about that in a minute so you can understand the difference between a charter school and a regular district-run school. But there were charter schools earlier than Jeb Bush. But again, this is when they really started pushing charter schools to have an option for school choice. Now, then in 2001, this was the big change where we started to go private, because charter schools, as I said, are still public schools and are required to meet the same standards and accountability measures. But now we moved to a whole new scheme, I would call it, called private vouchers, or as they call them, scholarships. And Jeb Bush really, again, was the architect of this plan. And it was very, very well thought out. Excuse me. One thing they did was a very deceptive use of language. So instead of vouchers, they called them scholarships, which really made it sound very distinguished. You know, my child is getting a scholarship, so that really sounds nice. They called tax credits donations. So let me explain that, and we'll go into this a little further. But the tax credit, what this is a corporation could choose, rather than paying their state corporate tax to the state government to run the government, they could divert it to a private charity called Scholarship Funding Organization and get a dollar for dollar tax credit. So this in no way was a donation. This was just a tax credit, but they called them donations. So it sounded very thoughtful. And then these scholarship funding organizations were called charities in that they were giving out scholarships. But really the truth is they are a money management firm that is just doling out state money to individual parents to use for private education. And the biggest one in Florida is called Step Up for Students. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about them a little later to show you what exactly they're doing. But this was the first time that we were seeing public money being transferred to private organizations to go directly into the pockets of individual parents. So that was the beginning, but now we're starting to see the expansion. And this year, the legislature, as you know, is moving toward what they call universal vouchers or universal scholarships, in that every family, no matter what your income level, can get one of these private vouchers. So let's go back and see how this started. So the beginning of the voucher program, the privatizing education, was to help low-income families leave failing schools. So it was a very virtuous kind of thing. If you were in a really bad school, you could get a scholarship or a voucher to go to a better school or a private school. Then they added the category of students with special needs. And again, this was very appealing to the public and everybody, because if you had a child with special needs and they weren't being well served in their public school, you could get a voucher to get extra help for your child, or go to a public school or private school where there might be more help. So again, very well-intentioned, thoughtful thing. And I would say, as a person, my whole career was working in public schools, especially in what they call Title I schools, which are the high poverty inner city schools. Many of them aren't doing a very good job. So as a parent, you could see where you could have this special extra money to help your child, and everybody wants to do that. Then they added this a few years ago, where this was called the Hope Scholarship, and students who were being bullied. So if your child was being bullied at school, you could get a voucher to move them to another school. And this again, you know, sounds good on the surface. Then they started inching toward where we are going now, which is, then they added that the income level was increased. And about 2 years ago, the legislation changed it, where a family making $100,000 would qualify. So it no longer was it just for low income families, but it was moving into the middle class. Then here's another thing they did. This is what's going to happen this year, is they're eliminating the requirement for private enrollment in a public school. So again, the whole idea that you can move your child out of a failing public school, now, even if your child's never been in a public school, they qualify for a voucher. And now with this new, it's HB1 and its companion bill SB 202, these are the universal voucher bills that are moving through the legislature. And the reason it's HB1, that means it's the highest priority bill. And in the Senate, it's a very high priority. So this is sure to pass. And Governor DeSantis, of course, is fully behind it. Now, this is really, as I say, we are moving now toward 3 systems of education. And more, they're working to privatize our public schools. Now let's talk about some of these so-called scholarships. The tax credit scholarship was the original one. It's primarily used for private school tuition. And here again, and when you look at the stories, and I urge you, if you can find, the Orlando Sentinel is going to come out with a Sunday, really wonderful report on the voucher, what's happening. And it takes you to see some of these schools that are springing up that will take these vouchers, and they're, you know, very low quality and very troubling about what's happening to kids' education. So, you know, the amount of a voucher is about $8,000 to $10,000, depending on the type of voucher. But that doesn't cover tuition in a really high-end private school. And I'm sure in Lee County, you've got some. We have one here called McClay. These are like college prep private schools, very expensive. So most of these vouchers are going for not so high quality private schools. Some of them are just springing up overnight to take advantage of this money. Now, as I said before, they call them donations. These are not donations. The corporations are getting a tax credit for moving their money over to this private Step Up for Students organization. And this is interesting. The scholarship I mentioned called the Hope Scholarship for bullied students. You are paying for this, anybody who buys a vehicle. And what happens is when you go buy a car or a truck or whatever, you know, you have to pay sales tax. And when you go purchase your car, there's a whole bunch of forms you have to fill out. And one of those forms is allowing you to make a quote donation for part of your money that you would be paying for sales tax to go to this private organization to use for scholarships. So a lot of people are totally unaware of this, but this was a pretty clever scheme they came up with to raise more money for the vouchers. And this is troubling because some of the stories were starting to come out about bad things happening with these voucher schools, and the corporations were getting bad press. The legislature was very gracious in making it anonymous. So now we don't know who the corporate donors are. And we did before, and I'll tell you the biggest donor or the biggest tax credit group was the liquor industry, interesting enough. A lot of the big liquor corporations were moving their tax dollars over to the private voucher system. Now, the next thing they added, so now it's called Family Empowerment Scholarships, and that's where we are now. And this is the one they're expanding into a universal system. And this is really, really troubling because this is now where they're taking money right from our tax money, general revenue, to pay for these private vouchers. The tax credit was a very clever scheme because they could say, oh no, it's not tax money. This is coming from this private organization through donations. And in fact, they took the group, and I think the league was involved in taking it to the Supreme Court, that this was clearly a violation of the separation of church and state, since the majority of the private schools getting these vouchers are religious schools. And but it was thrown out because they said there wasn't standing because it wasn't coming from general revenue, it was coming from this private organization. But now they have amped it up where now it is coming out of general revenue. And each district, and I should have looked up what Lee County got dinged for, but each district loses millions of dollars that they have to give up to go over to Step Up for Students, this private organization, to use for vouchers. And this is really very interesting and troubling, in my opinion. The way these funds are distributed now, instead of, you get a check which you then give to the school for tuition, they're now doing it through what they call education savings accounts. And you may have heard of ESAs. And this is essentially like a debit card. So as a parent, I can get one of these debit cards for $8,000, $10,000, whatever it may be worth for that particular parent. And I can use that for all kinds of things. And we've heard, you can use it for tutoring, you can use it for computers, you can use it for school supplies, you can use it for a lot of things. We've heard, of course, stories of abuse, like using them for flat screen TVs or taking, a trip and calling it a field trip. And it's supposed to be monitored by this group called Step Up for Students, but from what we can see, they're not doing a very good job. Let's just put it that way. And so they've really opened up the doors for what you can spend this money on. And there's no quality control. So a parent could be bamboozled into some, religious workbook kind of thing. And if you read the Orlando Sentinel article, there's some really troubling stories about some of the curriculum materials that some of these schools are using, especially the religious schools. So anyway, they can buy whatever they want, whatever they think is so good for their child. And this is interesting. If they don't use it all, they can roll it over into a college savings account. So if you start getting a voucher for a kindergarten, and by the way, once in, always in. So once you've got your voucher, you've got it for all through 12th grade if you want it. You could build up a nice little nest egg at our expense for your college savings account. So the Family Empowerment Scholarship is the real troubling one as far as accountability and as far as, again, separation of church and state and everything else constitutional that we'll talk about in a minute. And by the way, I'm going to open this up for questions and comments at the end. So if you, I'll have plenty of time for that if you're interested. So now we're moving to the next extreme of dismantling public schools. And as we know, our current governor is really ramping it up. And, I just listed a few of the things, the bills, and of course, the legislature is right in step with him. It's not just DeSantis, he's got the legislature in his hip pocket. But this is all the stuff they're just attacking our public schools as being teaching, critical race theory and all these things that are not even true. And it's driving teachers out, and it's making people really fear and distrust our public schools. So they will want to get their kids some, another alternative. And it's very troubling how this is being intensified. And it's hard to even counterattack it when they're just telling things that aren't even true. So where we are now, as I said, going back to Horace Mann, where we had a little bit of everything. Well, guess what? We're kind of heading that way again. So what we have now are three parallel and unequal systems. We have our district schools, our charter schools, and then the private schools, and now they've even included homeschooling. So it's really very different systems operating off of our public money. So just a recap of how are they different? Excuse me, let me take a sip. Okay, so the public schools are governed by an elected school board and accountable to the public. And of course, this is the thing I know your district is concerned. We all are at the league. The DeSantis wants to make our school board partisan elections, but at least until now they are nonpartisan. But the school board is accountable to the public and runs the school system. The district, the staff are professionally, they have to be certified, at least the superintendent does. And the teachers, for the most part, need to be certified and trained. They're located in neighborhoods. They're funded by property tax, and which the state sets the millage rate. So they still have control over how much the schools can get. And then, of course, high poverty schools get supplemental funds from Title I. The teachers and administrators are certified and trained, and the curriculum adheres to state standards and testing requirements. So at least there is accountability, and the curriculum is based on research and agreed to standards that are based on fact and reality and appropriate. So the charter schools, that's the second wave that we have here. You have an independent, non-elected school board. So the charter schools are completely independent. The local school board did have authority over the school as far as, you know, they have to meet the standards. But now the state, again, now there's a state board for charter schools that can override the local school board if the school board does not approve a charter school, because it's got a, you know, even if it has a terrible application and but the state can still overrule the local school board. So charter schools are independent now. And this has really become a quite scandalous, I would say, or troubling, is that there's a lot of money being made off of charter schools, especially these for-profit companies that come in, they build a school building, and then if the school closes, which is like we had one here in Tallahassee, the private organization reaps the profits from selling off the building. So they're doing, there's people that, you know, said there's money to be made. They can be anywhere. They're, you know, they don't have to be in a nice building. Some of them are, but many of them are in churches, basements, and shopping malls, and so on. And they are funded, again, this money drains from your district school, because if a student goes to a charter school, whatever the amount of money is budgeted that year, which again is around $8,000, that money moves with the student over to their charter school. And then the legislature also has been benefiting the charter companies by giving them capital outlay funding, sometimes even more than they give your district to build and maintain its school buildings. So this is another drain on your district schools that are losing funding. They do have to have certified teachers at a charter school, but they don't have to have certified administrators. And the curriculum does have to adhere to the state standards. So the charter school kids do take the tests, and their school is graded just like the public schools or the district schools. So at least the parents know, as far as making a choice, whether that school is meeting state standards and how are the kids doing as far as academically. But now let's move in. Our third leg of our system are the private schools. And these are completely unregulated. Private groups, religious groups govern them, who knows. Various locations, again, many of them are run by churches. And now we have homeschooling, and you have parents who set up a little pod in their home and bring in 3 or 4 kids, and they can get vouchers for that system. And as I've told you before, they are funded by our money, even though it's kind of hidden in different ways, but still these are all being funded by public tax money. They don't have any requirements whatsoever. No, and again, parents are making choices based on little knowledge. And as far as what is this school really like, other than, oh, it sounds good. And, you know, we don't have tests. A lot of the parents that come up here to the legislature to testify about how much they love their private school, one of the first things they always say is, we don't have to take any tests at this school. So who knows? Let me just real quick, I'm winding down here and then we'll leave it open for comments. But I want to talk to you about this Step Up for Students. This is the third leg of our system, which is a totally private organization taking our money, which is being swept over them. And they are, I call them hiding in plain sight. And if you want to learn more, the League did a report on them about 2 years ago. It's on the League state website. You can find it there. But what we found was very troubling. It's now the 9th largest charity. In other words, this is right up there with the American Cancer Society and huge organizations. They are taking in billions of dollars and completely pretty much out of sight. This Step Up for Students is the big operator in Florida, and they are getting most of the money. This is their headquarters. I happened to track them down. This is in Jacksonville. This is one, they also have a another office in Clearwater, but it's a huge operation. They get a 3% fee for every voucher. So out of that $10,000 voucher, they get 3%. And they can use it for all kinds of things, as you'll see. They're, and you might not be surprised, they're a well-connected board. The founder was a colleague and a crony of Jeb Bush, and he's a billionaire from Tampa, and his name is John Kirtley, and all these people, well-connected board members, and many of them have PACs, political action committees, that can give campaign donations to legislators to keep this stuff going. They use the money that, again, this is our money, they're using to market and do public relations. And also they're the ones that go out and recruit the corporations to divert their corporate tax. And so they have a huge operation. And I tell you, I've had some articles exposing Step Up for Students in various newspapers, and man, their PR people are on my case the next day. You know, they have another article out. So they're very well connected and very powerful. And they also now on their website, they have direct access to these vendors that are selling all this stuff. And another investigation I think should be done to see, are they also getting a cut of that? We don't know. But there's a lot of money to be made, as they're finding out. And then they also lobby for expanded funds, and they're up here at the legislature every year saying, oh, we need more money, we need more money. So they are a big outfit that more people need to know about, because this is, again, they're using our money, and this is really troubling. 2 years ago, they used to have to be audited every year, but now they got the legislature to give them a friendly pass where they are only audited every 3 years. And if you see our report, our investigative report from the league, the audits are like, you know, really troubling as far as when they did find deficiencies, what were the sanctions, what were the consequences, and we couldn't see any. And the legislators, Manny Diaz, who's now our Commissioner of Education, he would say, oh no, we have guardrails, you know, and we said in our report, these guardrails were made out of toothpicks because we couldn't find that there was much oversight. So I'm wrapping up here, but let's talk about the league issues. We support the Constitution. We support democracy. We're defenders of democracy. And our state constitution, I mean, I've already talked about the American Constitution, which talks about the separation of church and state, which clearly we're in violation of that. But our state constitution requires an adequate provision for a uniform, efficient, safe, secure, and high quality. And I would submit to you that where we are now is neither uniform or efficient, and clearly very questionable, if not blatantly unconstitutional. So there we are. This is the dismantling of public education. It's been going on for years, but it's been intensified recently. And of course, our position and my personal position is, instead of not, dismantling the public schools, which do need improvement, why don't we just invest in our public schools and really bring them up to speed? Because still, that's where the majority of our students are educated. About 80% of our kids are still in our public schools. So this scheme to dismantle them is really troubling, and there we are. So that's it, the references. I'm glad to be here. There's my email address if you want to contact me. And I am open for questions. I'm going to stop my screen sharing, and thank you for taking time to hear all this. So I look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Dr. Butzin. We will take questions, but we have to pass the microphone around so that she can hear the questions. Is there one to start with?
Okay.
First of all, thank you for this presentation. Two questions. You gave us your email. Are you going to provide the PowerPoint? Is that somewhere that we can access it or see it, or is it just yours that you use in presentations?
It's really just mine. I'm reluctant to give it out, but if there's a particular slide or something you want us to get, I'd be happy to send that to you.
Okay, I'll just email you. The
Okay.
other thing, I was listening a few weeks ago, I think it was in January, when they had the public coming in and talking about this bill that you were mentioning with the vouchers. And one of the legislators was giving the example that most of the lower income students that switch and take the vouchers and go to these schools, she said something like there's 3,000 that they can choose from, but there's only like 200 or 300 of them that you can go to with just the voucher money. So how they're separating is that if you've got just the voucher, or you've got the voucher and you have an extra $20,000 to put your child in a better school. And the other thing that was interesting is she said after 1 to 2 years, most of the lower income students had returned to public school, and because they weren't being tested and all of that, they went back to public school and were actually further behind than when they had left. Can you address that?
Yes, that we have heard many stories, and that needs to be studied even further, but there are many stories, and we just had one here, and our teacher wrote this in our local paper. She was at a high school over in Jefferson County near us, and again has students coming back from these private voucher schools who are hopelessly behind. And the curriculum, like she said, that this was supposedly a high school curriculum, but this girl's transcript looked more like an elementary school report card as far as the courses she was taking. And so it's really tragic. And the other, so you're right about that. There are the schools that will take the full voucher are very mediocre, if not really substandard. But a parent would have to have supplemental income to supplement the voucher amount to go to a high quality private school. So the other thing that we should mention too, that's really troubling, is what's happened, the harm being done to children. And there are many reports. In fact, there was one legislator herself, a Democrat, that I heard in committee meetings, who has a child who's a special needs child. And she sent her child to a private school, and they claimed, that they could follow this child's IEP. And for those non-educators, that's an individual education plan that's required by federal law. And so, but the private school doesn't have to do that. So the child is basically giving up their civil rights for getting an adequate education if they have special needs. So again, this legislator, even though the school claimed, oh yes, we can handle your child's special needs, they weren't even close. So she's having to now take her child back out of that school. And this is happening more and more. So the real tragedy is that parents are supposedly making choices, but they can't make an informed choice when so much information is hidden. And that is very concerning.
Good morning, Dr. Butzin. Thank you for the presentation. I will be in Tallahassee along with members of my sorority, which is Delta Sigma Theta. We go for Delta Days at the Capitol each year to advocate. And one of our workshops, believe it or not, is how education is being affected. 2 questions. We don't have any money, so I'm going to ask, are you available to make presentations in Tallahassee?
I'm available, and I'm not asking, I don't do it for money either. I'm retired. I just do it because I really believe that we need to make people aware. I'm an educator. I need to educate people. So if I'm available, I'd love to help you.
Yeah, I'll be in contact with you, trust me. Thank
Okay.
you so much. If it's free, it's for me. I'm Jerry Ware.
Okay.
We have another question. I see you. Oh, I'm on this side of the room anyway, so.
Well, thank you for me too. This was just enlightening and eye-opening. I guess I'm wondering, your presentation was how did we get where we are? And obviously, I think all of us would like to leave with sort of where do we go from here? And I'm wondering, you've mentioned a few things which sound kind of like a defensive response, like we can write our legislators about HB1 and S202. The league can take things to court and try to challenge again separation of church and state, all that. But is there anything else that you think we as individuals can do? And how do we go about, reversing that last slide of the dismantling and the vouchers going over? How do we bring that back? I mean, what can we do?
That's a really good question. And I agree with you. It's like the train has left the station and it's got so much momentum. What can we do? And in my feeling is, the best we can do is educate the public to, like this whole thing with Step Up for Students. Even my educator friends, I'll say, have you ever heard of Step Up for Students? Never heard of it. Because one thing the only thing that's going to stop this is public opinion. And of course, voting, and that's hard to get people out to vote, as we know. But I think the public, maybe they don't care about education, or especially in Florida. I think it is hard because we have so many people that have moved here as retirees who are like, oh, I already raised my kids in Michigan, I don't care about the public schools. But I think everybody does care about being ripped off. And I think the more we can expose how there are these grifters, in my opinion, who are making money off of this. And it's really troubling these low quality fly-by-night schools where people are bringing in this money. And now that they've opened it up to the whole homeschool, you can just imagine the possible scandals that might emerge. So the more that we can just let the public know, did you know that your public money, your tax money is being used for these things? They aren't aware of it. But I hate to sound hopeless, but it isn't hopeless, but it's, it took, 20, 30 years to get where we are now, and it's going to take us a long time. And as far as voting, the main thing we've got to do is figure out how we can vote for a good governor, because as I said, the governor completely controls the public education system. And as long as we have governors who are into privatizing our system, we're in trouble. So I hate to sound like a pessimist, but I just think the more we can, not just write, I think writing your legislators, I know this is against the league position, but I just think it's hopeless. This is going to pass no matter what we do. But the only thing we can do is try to educate the public on what's going on behind the scenes.
I just wanted to clarify for myself. So do people, first of all, I thought there was some conflict perhaps between the homeschoolers and the private schoolers, because the homeschoolers didn't want to have their kids take any tests at all. Or there was some conflict that was, the homeschoolers were thinking of kind of withdrawing from the voucher idea. So that's question number one. I'm not sure about that. And number two, so if you take these vouchers, do you have can you prove that your child has actually been educated?
Good questions. Yeah, the homeschool, one thing, the only really, to me, kind of good thing in this current bill, this HB1, is that because they were going to allow money to go to homeschoolers, they did require the homeschoolers had to take a test. And the other thing they had in this bill was a homeschooler had to work with what they called navigator to make sure that the child was getting the right supplies and stuff like that. Well, the homeschool people have been up at the legislature when I've been there. They don't want that. They want absolutely no oversight whatsoever. And it will be, they did now take out the legislators did say now the navigators are optional. So the homeschoolers have won that battle. As far as the testing, that hasn't been decided, but I mean, I'm sure they're still going to take the money. But here's the, and your second question relates to that, is that no, there is no way we know what these kids are learning, because even there are requirements that a private school that takes a certain number, a large number of vouchers is required to have the students tested. But they don't have to take the state test. They can take any norm reference test, which is good. But here's the catch. Only the parent gets the results of the test. So as a public, we don't know, you know, again, our money's going to pay for this child's education, and we have no clue as to whether they're actually learning anything. It's up to the parent, according to the philosophy of the privatizers. This is all parent choice. Parents know best what's good for their child, and it's none of our business. That's their point.
I'm walking around the room for another question.
Okay.
Hi, thank you so much. It was very interesting and very educational. I don't have children, so it's interesting to learn about and so important. So I'm interested in, has anyone followed these students as they graduate and looked at like what their college acceptance rates are, and then also further their earning ability? Because it seems, you know, like obviously if you have a substandard education, that you are actually impacting both economies and people for life and their ability to actually be productive. And the second question I have is about the, is there really actually a way that that anyone can organize around having an anti-position given what's in power? Because it seems that our governor seems to figure out ways to, you know, either through vindictiveness or strategy or whatever you want to call it, to really be able to disempower people who take an anti-position to what he is promoting.
That's really troubling now, because in the league, of course, is fighting against all these draconian measures to silence us, because now there's a new regulation. It's not even a bill, but it's a regulation now this year at the Capitol building, where we used to be able to set up tables to put out literature and things that would be against, like we could set up a table, say, exposing Step Up for Students, but we wouldn't be able to this year, because they now have a new rule that any tabling that goes on up at the Capitol during session has to align with the state positions on issues and causes. So it's really, I mean, we are heading into, you know, a semi-fascist, if not totally fascist regime that is squelching speech. And of course, you know, they have now the new law that passed last year, I think it was, where protests and demonstrations, you can be arrested. If, let's just say you're at a protest and there's a fight that breaks out, even if you weren't part of the fight, you can be arrested for being there. And so they're very deliberately chilling our speech and ability to speak out in opposition to some of these things. So it's just very, very scary. And we need to get more people in the league, because, you know, groups like the league, we do have ways to fight this in court and whatnot. But then, of course, that's troubling, because look what's on the Supreme Court now. It's mostly all appointees by DeSantis. So even going to the courts is not guaranteed to help. So I hate to, you know, put out such a negative picture, but I think we all need to be aware. This is very troubling stuff. And, you know, you read articles about what was happening in Germany, and the Germans would say, oh, this would never happen here. No, this could never happen here. But you just look step by step by step, and, you know, going after public education is one of the first steps.
Just following up on that, are there coalitions around these education issues? I know, like reproductive rights in Florida, we have a pretty good coalition, which is taking, you know, is very vocal. What about for education? I mean, that might be one way that our voice could get out there much louder.
Yeah, yes, that's the good news. There is a coalition. We meet every Monday at 2 o'clock by Zoom. There's about 6 or 7 organizations, including one called Pastors for Florida's Children. They're doing a really good job of, kind of turning the corner on the religious point that they had a interesting seminar that was pointing out that a lot of these religious schools are white Christian nationalist schools. That's their curriculum. And so the other pastors, from other denominations and the Jewish, other communities that the religious are also very troubled by what's happening here. So there's that. The ACLU is very involved. The AFL-CIO of all people, they're also troubled by what's happening. So there is a coalition. There's also a really good group called the Florida Policy Institute. They're based in Orlando. They're part of our coalition, and they just put out a really good report on how much this new bill is going to cost, because the legislature, it's just unbelievable. I was up at the Capitol during the presentation of the bill, and the bill's sponsor, whose name is Representative Tuck. She's a woman from, I forget where, Central Florida somewhere. She claims that this will only cost like $800 million, where the Florida Policy Institute did a very thorough analysis, and it's going to cost $4 billion. And that's money coming from our schools. Our schools, and then the Representative Tuck also had the nerve when she was asked, will this impact our public schools? And she said, oh no, there won't be any impact at all. They're just wrong. And if you look to Arizona had went with one of these universal vouchers, and they totally underestimated how much it would cost, because once you let everybody be able to apply for one of these vouchers, the cost goes up exponentially, and the drain on our public schools is just very, very dramatic. It's terrible.
As a 6th generation Floridian, I went to great public high schools. I went to 2 in Florida, and I couldn't have gotten a better high school education. And I think most of the people in this room, we're all old enough that we don't have kids in school anymore. We have grandchildren, or maybe even great-grandchildren. And concerned that we need a way to light a fire under the other grandparents so that we can really make a difference and have a voice. Florida had a strong tradition of high quality schools at one point. But I'm talking to people who can't get out of the state fast enough because of our governor and all of these policies. I'd love to see a printed expose, maybe as a drop in, in local newspapers and other places that could be widely distributed. And I think that would be really helpful, because we have to find better ways to get the word out that truly explains the history and the course that we're on that you explained today.
Well, as I said, the Orlando Sentinel, they've already published it online, but Sunday, they're going to come out with a really, really compelling big story about the voucher system and this new law. So hopefully we can get that article widely distributed, but yeah, that's what it's going to take.
Good morning, and thank you for coming out to speak to us this morning. I want to ask, you talk about educating the public, but when you have a legislature that's totally controlled by a Republican, and then you have a Republican governor that has scared the hell out of all of these legislatures, and whatever he says, that's the way they're going to vote. So even though you may get with the public, how do you feel that you're going to change that vote with those legislatures? Because that's where the whole difference is going to come. Until you can get that changed, it's not going to make a difference how much you educate your public out there. And also another question, these charter schools that go bankrupt, do we get any of that money back from them at all?
Good. Well, the second question is no, we don't. And that's a big bone of contention too, is that when some of the opposition, the Democratic legislators have tried to put legislation, in the district would get the money back, they always beat that down. And, I share your frustration, if that's the right word. But as I say, I agree with you. There is no way this year, even if we educated the public and the public was there with pitchforks, they are already on board. This is going to pass with flying colors. There's not a thing we can do about it at this point. But like I say, I guess, I'm not going to live long enough to see this happen, but we have to look at it as a long range strategy, because it took them, 30, 40 plus years to get where we are now. And it's going to be a long haul, I think, but that's our only hope. And I've been thinking, I'm in jest, but I think maybe we should think about this. But there's a group called Moms for Liberty. Have you heard of them? And they're getting all kinds of money and all kinds of press, and they cause trouble, I'm sure, in your district. They may be, I know they've taken over some of the school boards and so on. But I was saying we should start a Grannies for Sanity. And I think maybe us grandmothers can mobilize for our grandchildren's sake, because you're right. I had my grandchildren live in, 2 of them are in New York and 2 are in California. And they were here visiting, and my grandchildren are getting where they're almost ready for college. And I was thinking, when they come visit, I should take them to Florida State for a tour. But I'm thinking, I would not want my grandchildren to go to school in Florida right now. And the universities are under attack. Look what's going on at New College. The professors are scared to death to say anything for fear they're going to lose their tenure. It's a terrible situation for all of our education system, and it's very, very troubling. And I guess we need to get to a point where people finally, will say, oh my goodness, I didn't realize this was happening, but it may be too late.
Good morning. Thank you. I just wanted to let everyone here know I'm representing the American Association of University Women today, the Fort Myers Lee County branch, and I've been working on HB1. And according to the Florida Policy Institute, the cost for HB1 to Lee County next year could be $88 million. And when we look at what's happened down at the Sanibel School as a result of the hurricane, and they can't decide what to do, whether to rebuild it or put portables down there, whatever, it's going to be significant for our school district if it passes.
Yep, you're right.
You have a comment, Dr. Butzin?
No, she's right. Like I said, that report from the Florida Policy Institute said it's the whole state, it should be up to 4 billion with a B. And then, of course, as she said, each district is going to, part of that will come out of the hides of each district.
Sally, I'm Maddie Stewart. I'm on the State Ed Committee with you.
Hi.
I know that you have a brochure that you've produced. I wonder if we should have access to that and at least give it out wherever we can so people can understand a comparison that you created.
Yeah, it was a team. It wasn't just me, but I
Yes.
kind of took the lead on it. But yes, the league has now a trifold brochure that we can make available. I think each league has to print out their own copies of it, but it's available on the league website. But it's a trifold, and it basically, the title is Understanding School Choice, and it just shows very dramatically this 3 parallel systems that are unequal and unfair and not equitable in any way, shape, or form, or not efficient. So it aligns, it has a checklist of here are all the requirements for district schools, here are all the requirements for charter schools, and here are the requirements for private schools, which is basically nothing. So it's a real good visual to see how the three parallel systems that we're all paying for are very starkly different. And go to I can send it to you, or you can go to the league website. It's available on there, but then you got to print it out yourself, I believe.
Can you give us more information about this Ed Coalition you were mentioning? Everybody, I think, is interested to know more about. Can we email you the one that meets on Mondays?
What I'll do is Sarah, I will send you the information about it, and then you can get it out to your folks. But yeah, there's a weekly meeting, strategy meeting, and I'm sure it's open to anybody that would like to participate. So I'll get that information out to Sarah, and she can share it with you.
This is Gwen Gittens again. We were talking about with no testing for some of these schools, and one of the ladies mentioned about how do they do with college entrance. And I was thinking, even though they don't have the state testing, but to get into college, you have to do ACT, SAT, one of those college entrance tests. How do they do? I mean, how do they do that? What criteria do they use for getting those students that don't have that education into college?
Well, that's the problem is we really need to have some kind of a study as far as how are these kids doing on the ACT and whatnot. But here's the problem. It's private. We can't find out because the parent would have to release that information. It's because they have crafted these bills so that it's totally under the parent's control. And with our little task force that did this report on the Step Up for Students, when we would try to find information from the Department of Education, the answer would be, that's private. We don't have anything to do with that. And so this whole idea of private stays private, and it's only the parents. And as I said before, that even if the student has to be tested in some of these situations, the parent gets the results, but they don't have to share that with anybody. So it's really just a total mystery. And there is one group that there's, again, certain private schools, if they have enough students that are getting vouchers, they do have to submit test scores to a research group at Florida State University. But there again, it's just a drop in the bucket because most of especially if you're homeschool, you don't have to report your results to anybody. It's totally up to the parents' discretion. And that's the other thing I've made the argument in some of my legislative testimony. They have this naive belief that every parent makes all kinds of wonderful choices. And their thing is always the parent knows best at what's good for their child. But I point out, why do we have 19,000 kids in foster care if there are all these just wonderful parents that are making great decisions? And we need to protect our children. We have an interest in raising healthy, well-educated children for our whole society. And this idea that just totally turn it over to the parents is very troubling.
Does anyone have one last question? Scanning one last question.
Thank you. This has really been eye-opening. I think I had attended a lunch and learn where you presented similar information, but frequency is good. One of the pluses we have in this state as a new resident is the ability to put things on the ballot, to have a little bit more checks and balances. So I wondered with your recommendation of build awareness and mobilize more, if that could be a course to perhaps have more checks and balances.
That's if only. That's another thing that our new regime, I would call it, You know, the legislature also has changed it. So to get an initiative on the ballot to change the Constitution, it's almost impossible because they've raised the threshold of what the vote is. They've also cracked down on petition, gathering petitions, how you can do that. And, to get one of those issues on the ballot is way super duper expensive. I mean, we're talking millions of dollars, and there are not very many groups that have those deep pockets to fund that. So while I wish that was a remedy, I think that, again, the legislature has carved out exemptions to make it nearly impossible for citizen input anymore.
Dr. Butzin, thank you for this wonderful presentation. I think everybody here agrees.
Thank you so much. It was my pleasure. And yeah, like I say, I'm happy to do this for other groups if you're interested. And thank you for your attention. I feel if I'm up on a big screen, I feel like I'm Big Brother looking down on you, but it's been really fun to be with you. And again, come up to Tallahassee. We have lobby days coming up this week. If any of you are coming up, I'll look forward to meeting you. But thanks for being here and thanks for the invitation.
Thank you. And thanks to all of you for coming. Those of you who are not members, we would love to have you join. Amy Wolf is right here, our membership chair, and there are plenty of ways to do it. Sandy, did you want to say something?
Hi, I'm Sandy Frank, member of the league here. For those of you who are not on our email distribution list and would like to be, we do have a sign up list for you. So you can get information from us, whether you are a member or not, and we'd like you to do that. I have a list in my hand and there's also one on the table up there. And the second thing I wanted to mention while have the microphone, there is a clean water amendment petition that is circulating, and I do have copies of that. You can get it online as well. And we'll be talking about this more later. And I think the league at the state level is promoting this petition. And I think we will be doing that locally, but I do have petitions here, and it's to your advantage if you want to sign it and hand it back to me, because then you won't have to pay for postage. I can return it to the collectors for you. So I'm back here if you would like to sign that. Thank you.
Thanks to everyone for coming. Feel free to stay and visit in person. Doesn't happen very often.
Oh, okay.
Thank you again. Nancy. It's good.
Next time around.
Oh, no. Or just you being on the board. Yeah. the farmer. I know, yeah.
Because she was talking about certified administrators. Be certified. They just have to live in Wayne County and not get felon. Seriously.
Yeah.
Seriously. It'd be like- So much. I was. Now I don't introduce.
I'm thinking about getting
I'll have a meeting afterwards. I've been so.
Oh, bigger land.
Sorry. Oh, so I got